All right, so welcome to today's presentation. It is Making Assessment Meaningful, Closing the Loop. I'm Christy Reese. I am the chair of the Academic Assessment Committee and also the chair for DMS. Today's really going to be just kind of an overview of the assessment process on campus, what it currently is, following the assessment fellow process mainly, but also really putting acknowledgement out there that even if you're not an assessment fellow, you're likely doing some of the work. We're just not documenting it. All right, so the learning outcomes for today are to identify the key steps in the assessment cycle, explain assessment practices at Triton College, define what closing the loop is, and apply the information that is used in this presentation to your course and or program assessments. So what is assessment? It's the systematic collection, review, and use of information about educational programs and courses undertaken for the purpose of improving student learning and development. So as we look through our process here, really keep that definition in mind. Systematic collection, so we do it routinely and regularly, reviewing our data and information that we collect, and then using it for the purpose of improving student learning. And that really is the goal and the purpose, and what we do assessment for is to improve student learning across campus. So why do we assess? Continuous evaluation of our teaching and learning, so we can continuously grow and improve, a constant state of improvement. Not just assuming because we do it once and it works well that it's the best practice and it continues to be effective, but to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to provide the high quality education that we say we do in our courses and our programs. Also, a key part, and I know over the past several years this has been one of our guiding lights here, is to document our processes and evaluation for our stakeholders, with the biggest one that we always talk about being the Higher Learning Commission, but there are so many other stakeholders across campus, not just accreditors, but administration, the community, and our community partners and affiliates. Provide evidence-based practices for decision making. So this is really when we talk about our assessment fellow work and the current documented processes that happen, that work provides the evidence for us to make those decisions, those changes, and those improvements. So this is the assessment cycle image that we have looked at for years now, but it's a good one, that's why it keeps being used. So you'll see here that when we look at the assessment cycle, really what we've hammered down is the first 3 of 5 portions of that cycle. Identify desired outcomes. So we have those in our program learning outcomes, our general education outcomes, and our course level outcomes. Assess those outcomes, and that's part of our regular process when it comes to our assessment fellow plan and reports, as well as our general education evaluation, and interpret the evidence. So we get our assessment of those outcomes, we evaluate, did students meet our benchmarks, and then we do come up with ideas as far as ways we could improve if they are not met. The problem is that we're having trouble documenting or proving after that point, right? We've just kind of, here's our report for the year, and then nothing's happening after. So that's the part of closing the loop that not just us as Triton College struggle with, it is a nationwide issue across community colleges as well as universities, and it's not that closing the loop doesn't happen, it's just not documented well enough. So our hope and one of our goals for our committee this year is to start doing that, to showcase all of the work that we're doing as a result of our assessment evaluations and the changes that are occurring. I keep on clicking. All right, so just to give you an overview of the timeline, again, you're very familiar with it, but fall is all about kind of kicking off a brand new year. Professional development occurs in the fall. Reviewing our previous assessment work, so a nice time for reflection on what we've done already and setting a plan for what we're going to do this year. And there's really 4 key parts to the assessment planning process that's identifying the learning outcomes, identifying the method and measure that we will use for those outcomes, setting a timeline of when that will be collected, and then setting benchmarks. So whether you are an assessment fellow or not, this can be used by any faculty member to evaluate course level outcomes as well as program outcomes if you work within a department. So here's just a quick screen capture of our academic assessment plan and some of the key categories as far as the template goes. We are using this as just a template. We've transitioned to the watermark system, but nonetheless, this offers a nice, streamlined way of looking at how we evaluate program and course level outcomes. So picking which ones we're going to evaluate every year, our method or our measure, which is the activity in the classroom, or if we're using employer surveys as an indirect method of evaluation, completion rates as an indirect method of evaluation, a test, what are we going to use for our students as far as our tool, when we're going to do it would be our timeline, and then our success criteria. So that's set directly by faculty that are working in the classroom, or our program chairs as well, to say this is what we quantify as success. So an example would be 80% of our students pass this exam with an 80% or higher. So it has to be quantitative to where it can actually have some form of value. As we transition to spring, again, just to show the fellow timeline, Learning Improvement Week happens in spring, and that's when we talk about our year's work at the general education level, as well as best practice teaching and learning across campus, review our assessment data and develop our report. And really the factors that are considered in the spring semester is, were the benchmarks that we set met? Why or why not? Right? A nice time for reflection. Why do we think that they were or were not met? How can we improve student learning based on our experience and our evaluation? Do we need resources to take that action? So those are just our guiding questions as we go into the spring. And again, here's the template as well. This is what we've used for the past few years, just to really, outline again, what were we evaluating? What was our program learning outcome or our course level outcome that we were looking at? What was the results? When did we actually capture that information? Sometimes it's not always when we planned. Courses don't run in the fall, so we do it in the spring instead. So there is a little bit of a fluid ability with this. And how did that information compare to what we thought or what we set for our benchmark? You'll see at the bottom portion our action report, provide insight into what you've learned as a result of these findings, how you'll use this information to improve student learning, and if you need funding, right? Or resources, I should say, not just funding. There's so much more than that. So this is kind of where we've stopped in our current structure. And when you look at this, this is really an action plan. And this is where we stop documenting it. So as you look forward, when it comes to closing the loop, it's the stuff that happens after this that really closes the loop. So our learning outcomes are met, celebrate it, share it. That's great. There's not really much that you have to do at that point afterwards, other than reevaluate in a couple of years during the next 3-year cycle to make sure you're still up to par. Likely you will make changes, but share it, because if it works well, everybody across campus wants to know what you're doing that's so effective, because that's how we grow and we learn as professionals, is to hear the different things that are working in the classroom. So great if we've met and we're moving forward, but what about when they don't meet our goals, right? A hard look at the data really requires us to look at more just that superficial, students didn't pass, and go deeper, why didn't they pass? Why didn't they meet our goal? Sometimes our goals aren't realistic. I'm great at setting up unrealistic goals. 100% of my students are going to pass with a 90% or higher. Well, that's a little bit high. Maybe I need to be a little bit more realistic with my goals. Or maybe your goals were too low, and you'll find that even when you meet the standard, that sometimes you set the bar a little too low and you might want to adjust it for the next time. Our method, so maybe it was that assignment or that test question or a technique that you're using in the classroom that you can improve upon for better data collection the next time. Curriculum, so maybe the curriculum needs to be adjusted. Maybe the learning outcomes aren't currently relevant to what you are doing in the classroom or want to be doing in the classroom that will best serve students. Admission criteria for programs, so maybe you need either a higher or lower level requirement for students that are entering into those programs, and then support structure, supporting faculty, supporting students on multiple levels. Where do you think, as the specialist and the person that's in that classroom directly with those students in that department, where do you think led to this inability for us to meet our goals? So really focusing on closing the loop as our final piece of the puzzle is what I'm going to call it. Closing the loop is improvement strategies that we take based on our evidence and evaluation, but it's not just the strategies, it's the implementation of those strategies and then the reevaluation of them. And again, that's kind of where we aren't documenting. We're doing it, but we're just not documenting it. And I can say we're doing it because I've had so many conversations across campus where assessment fellows mainly are saying, oh, well, year one, I planned on doing this, and then I did it, and now we're in year three. And I'm like, great, let's document it. Let's start adding those action plans and the results back into what we're doing. So again, closing the loop really requires not just the evidence and the evaluation, but also that action plan implementation and then that reevaluation. Because closing the loop means that you've taken an area that was not met and made it an area that was met. There was improvement in student learning, and maybe it isn't exactly met to the original standard, but you've improved it from what it was before. So action plans, implementation, and reassessment, concrete plan for change. It has to be specific. You have to have a certain idea of how you're what you're gonna change in the classroom or with that program or that curriculum to change it and then reevaluate it. Now, the thing is that with assessment, it is never an overnight, we all know that, change. You have to have reasonable time for implementation. You have to have reasonable time for that reassessment period to demonstrate the impact. So curriculum, for example, you can't do that all in one semester and then run it the next semester in most cases and then see a change immediately. It's going to take time. It takes an approval process. So you have to give the time. And that's one thing that I will say, we're only in our third year of assessment. Some of those changes haven't happened yet. We haven't been able to reassess because we've had to go through the appropriate process of finding a change, implementing it, and then working on towards the reassessment. So here's some example of changes. And when I was going through this list and making this list, I did use a couple of different resources I'm more than happy to share, but I also was like, oh my goodness, I'm doing this stuff all the time, but I'm just not really documenting it in the assessment way, right, to show HLC or other members of faculty necessarily that this has happened. So curriculum, adjusting requirements, adding new courses, and revising our old courses. We're doing it for a reason, and normally it's related to an assessment, either deficiency or a change in the field that we're in that has led to a change. We don't just do it because we feel like it. There's a purpose and an intent. Pedagogy. Everybody knows I'm very much so into engaging activities and trying to make class fun, but adjusting our classroom practices and all the training that we went through over the past year related to pedagogy. When we're doing that, again, we're doing that with the lens of best practice and improving student learning in our classroom. Student supports, so advising, tutoring, online resources. If you're making adjustments to any of those, we have peer tutors. And we have those for a reason because we identified that just having a general tutor was not going to benefit DMS students. They needed specific tutors. Online resources, again, just supplemental material. When you see that maybe the classroom material, students need a little more content. We added personally through Perkins funding, online platform where students can scan at home on their computers to help with lab deficiencies that we were seeing. And again, was that documented anywhere? Nope. Right? It was talked about in the department, and we knew why we were doing it. Perkins had an assessment of it, but institutionally we weren't really sharing it. Faculty support, so professional development, the need for lab assistance is something that I came up with because that's one that I personally added, well, attempted to add, hopefully next semester we'll be adding a position for a lab assistant to come in and support the students as we teach different skills. But professional development, right? Things that we're doing to improve teaching and learning. Facilities and equipment, updating, expanding current spaces. I know it's difficult to expand current spaces in a lot of the buildings, but updating equipment, and that one I put on there intentionally because that's something that happened. An assessment fellow told me first year, I put in my report that we needed brand new equipment, it was outdated, and I felt that that's why students weren't succeeding. The next year they did it, last year. And now they get to reassess. So I'm like, absolutely, make that an action plan of yours, show us the results and how they vary from what you initially had that first year. If you have room in your assessment evaluation to do that again, that would be wonderful, so that we can really document that full change, and we'll see, was it effective? Was it a true example of closing the loop? All right, so with that, come on, you and I can talk. What are things that you've already done to close the loop that maybe after me saying that you didn't even realize?
Well, one of the things that we're doing in college readiness is, well, it's a state requirement. We're revising how students go on through their ed courses. The state has now changed where a student has to only go through one semester. So we're looking at only having 2 ed courses, which would be Math 80 for non-STEM and Math 85 for STEM students. But looking at the curriculum for those students who go through Math 85, to go through the STEM bridge, going through the COREX, and then also going through the college algebra class. But for Math 80, the non-STEM, but implementing some additional topics that if the student decides he or she they want to go into a STEM, they can still go straight into the STEM class, which would be the COREX for the 110. It's a state requirement, so we just have to go through and revise it. But we went through and did some revisions before. You're right, but it wasn't documented because.
Right. Who thinks of it that way?
Sure.
Right.
Especially with the equipment and our lab, because when we opened up the iLaunch lab, I don't think it was documented at the time for acceleration
right.
for our students.
So I mean, though, again, that's a great example, especially in that lab, how amazing it is and how helpful it is for students as far as better outcomes. So those are the types of things that hopefully we'll start having more conversations after I present this, a little bit more, and hopefully get a broad spectrum really voice for this. And I think this is going to be part of Learning Improvement Week, is really, we want to hear stories of what people are doing and again, a lot of people do not even realize this work is already happening. I'll say too, for me, a lot of curriculum revision for me is based on my advisory board, so talking to our hospital partnerships about what they're seeing with our students and how they feel that we can improve them and make them more employable, improve their employability skills. That led to last semester, now I have to adjust our curriculum to add a physics lab that wasn't previously there, an advanced image evaluation lab that they felt would be beneficial as far as our students being a little bit more prepared for advanced skills once they get out in the field. And not that they felt that our students weren't prepared, they just felt like they could be even better with things like that. Now, that's going to require me to restructure my curriculum, because I can't just go adding credits without, which is a whole nother story. But those are ways kind of using external partnerships and external voice to help drive the changes in assessing our students. So that's just one example. All right, so the missing piece of the puzzle is something that I created, but it's not official yet, but I feel comfortable enough to share. So our missing piece of the puzzle is the documentation, right? So this is just a little bit of a modified form that takes us from the report to a secondary evaluation, or really kind of our follow-up to that. So when you look there, it's action plan follow-up form. You have your PLO that you measured, you have the initial results, a little outline in the center of the action plan, and then a follow-up result. And again, it was met or it wasn't met, even in that follow-up. And we could go as far as to say it wasn't met again, let's propose another change and check back in a designated amount of time. At the bottom, provide insight into what you learned, just like we do with our reports, because we do want faculty area input into what have we learned from this. If we learn nothing, then there's no point in doing it, right? There was no purpose of completing that or continuing on. And then again, are there additional efforts needed? So if we didn't meet it, then what else can we try? And do those require some form of support or resource? So this form, again, is acting more as a template. All of this is now moving to Watermark, and this just aligns with kind of their plan. In Watermark, they do have an action plan area where you could copy and paste your action plan in there, and then you can set a date for review, for a realistic review. And I told everybody probably the start of the next academic year. Did I ever do anything with that? It's a good time to check in. And if I did, I can document, hey, I've worked on implementing, we're still in progress here. And I'll revisit, next semester or the next academic year when I've had a full time to really make another evaluation.
Now, would that be the same goes with us with the new plan that's coming out, which will go into effect in fall of next year? So that be when I have to do the evaluation of, well, maybe wait a semester to see exactly how effective it would be for students who are coming into the college for the first time, yes, and going only through one semester to go to the college level course.
Right, so that would allow the time for you really, maybe you want to peak at that first round, but then you're like, no, we need to look again. Give it a couple more offerings, and then get a better understanding, or an even better understanding of exactly how that's had that impact. Because as well as I do, one semester is not going to be enough. 2 semesters might not even be enough. It might have to run, 3 or 2 years to really see the impact or change that's been caused by that adjustment.
Right. I think with the state, I think we have to report it after a year, but right. I'm not sure. That's a meeting for next month. With the state to find out if we have to do it every year afterwards.
Right.
Sure.
Well, and then that would be a good thing too as we move forward with assessment, included in your plan every single year, because then you have a nice place where it's housed and it's consistent, and you can download it as a PDF to include in whatever documentation you need to push forward. So yeah, that's definitely kind of, hopefully the process moving forward is going to be a little more seamless, and we can use it in a multi-purpose. I can tell you I used all of my assessment work for the past 2 years in my self-study for my accreditation, as well as my site visit. So they wanted to see evidence of me doing assessment on my program, and not outside of the IPR. I really wanted to show how much we were working on with all of our assessment work. So as an assessment fellow, it made it easy for me to talk about. All right, so what is closing the loop? And I really like this quote, which is why I included it. Completing the assessment cycle, gaining evidence of improved student learning is assessment's nirvana. Measuring the impact of action taken to improve student learning. So it's so much more than just putting an action plan out there and letting it sit in the portal, right? It's really that final evidence of, I put effort out there, I changed something, and it worked. That's our goal. That's our true closing of the loop. And it's not to say that if the effort fails, you're not attempting to close the loop. You may not have closed it yet, but then you keep trying. And I think it's on my next slide. It is. Okay. So you develop your plan, you work on a report, you develop some action based on that plan, you reflect and reassess, you meet your goal, great, you close the loop, but if you don't and all fails, try and try again. Keep trying. As long as the effort is there and we're evaluating and we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we best serve our students, then we're doing our best to close it. And while you're doing that, my pitch for the peer review panel. The peer review panel is comprised of full-time and adjunct faculty. It is a subcommittee of the assessment committee, and they accept proposals for anything designed to improve student learning based on assessment data. It could be assessment data from 2 years ago. It could be from last year. It could be something that you're already finding out. It does not have to be assessment fellow work. You can do individual evaluation in your classroom, identify something you need, and put forward a proposal. They review the funding proposals based on standardized criteria, and they are in the portal. And we have $30,000 we've been struggling to spend for 2 years. So if we don't use it, we lose it. It replenishes every year. We were able to spend a little bit last year. I don't remember the exact dollar value, but two faculty had put through things for their classroom that we were able to support. Well, that moved on its own. All right. But yes, I would absolutely, it doesn't have to be assessment fellow work. If you think that you know of something in your classroom that you can evaluate, it could be this semester, get the report together, you can propose in spring. And again, there's technology funding, professional development funding. At this point, I'm starting to think that we might need to get a little creative and do small project funding, whatever we need to do to really support our assessment. Because the money is there, administration has given it to support it. We just want to make sure we use it. So hopefully, year one, you understand the pandemic happened as well. It was harder to use, but it was reassuring that last year we were able to get a couple more. And hopefully this year we'll spend it all. I did have some of my own ideas and working with possibly anatomy that I wanted to try and work with them and get an online platform for us to use for students. And that way it would be 2 different areas using one set subscription. But we'll see. We'll see. So just ideas. And that's all. That's all I had. So any questions, thoughts? It is a lot of work.
Yes, for me, it's more of the course outcomes, not the program, because we're not a program. So.
Right. Yeah, and I know we've talked about that for your level for sure. All right.